Well, hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. I'm your host, G. Mark Hardy, and today we're going to be talking about a much better way to deal with compliance reporting than filling out forms and compiling interviews. See, our guests today are from Fedshark, and they've got also a really special offer for you that they've created exclusively for our CISO Tradecraft listeners. If you go to fedshark.com/CISO, CISO, you can download their system security plan secrets white paper for free. And for a limited time, you can unlock a rapid CMMC pre-assessment with their Fedshark Rapid Assessor Starter for only $99. That sounds like a pretty good deal. So fedshark.com/CISO, check it out now or at the end of the show. For all of your listeners, thank you for following us. If you don't follow us on LinkedIn, please do so. We got a lot more than podcasts for you here at CISO Tradecraft. So today our guests are Brian Bradley and Josh Williams. They're from Fedshark, and let's get into our show. So Brian and Josh, welcome to the show. And today we're going to talk about the concept of how do we deal with all of these compliance requirements that are out there. And for those of us who have ever had to fill out these forms or complete everything like that, it's an absolute pain in the, well, we'll get into that level of detail. But you get the idea. But tell us a little bit first about yourself and how did you end up getting in this space? And again, of course, welcome to the show.
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay. Brian Bradley. I've got about, 25 years of IT security. I've been on the delivery side. I was networking Cisco systems, got into IT security after, 10, 12 years of doing that. Now I've been in primarily in the HIPAA space, but I've done everything from ISO to HIPAA to PCI, high trust, pretty much you name it, I've done it. Worked for a couple of different consulting firms, so I've gotten to see a lot of the, very large corporations down to the very small corporations. And I'll tell you, I just love cybersecurity. It's always changing, never gets boring. So
it is, and you've been around quite a while, so thank you. But let's find out a little bit more because I think, Josh, you've also been around for a while in this career space as well.
I have been. This is not hair coloring, G. Mark. This is natural gray. And I started my career
for at least 12 months, or you've been doing another longer career.
Well, I started my career in the federal space. I've been a GS1, got promoted all the way up to GS3. I've been an E1, got promoted up to NCO, and I've been an O1. And I landed in the scientific and technical intelligence community, and so those were early days of the doctrine around exploitation, and then I transitioned to the contractor role, and just like Brian, I've done a lot of compliance work, mostly implementing GRCs. Most of the compliance work was implementing governance risk compliance tools in Fortune 50, large government entities, and healthcare systems. So I'll run the gamut of control frameworks. And I did do one of the early 837.8 NIST Special Pub 837, 839 implementations or assessments for a health and human services component. And from that time on, as Brian indicated, I've been involved in different aspects like him of IT and cybersecurity.
Yeah, I remember when I talked to you the first time when you said you had worked as a GS1. I said, I thought the only GS1 job was the guy who did the time tick at WWV and had to go do 8 hours in a row.
No, I worked in data management with the 4th Transportation Brigade during the Cold War at Oberursel, Camp King, Germany. It was quite the experience. I was, high school student at the time.
It's still an opportunity to do some cool. So we talked about a bunch of things, GRC, control frameworks and things like that, ISO, PCI, HIPAA, NIST, et cetera. What do you find that tends to be the biggest frustration for people who have to do the compliance part of it, not necessarily writing the frameworks? We might get to that in a little bit, but the idea of compliance. What do you see as the biggest issues out there from your career experience?
I'll start, Brian. I think a lot of it is perception, the perception within the client or the customer or the organization or agency environment that compliance is a cost center. And really, I mean, I think we can all agree that all the control frameworks, most of them anyway, the statutory regulatory ones, HIPAA, NIST, FISMA, FedRAMP, CMMC, and the industry ones, the payment card industry data security standard, the theories are behind all of them. If you go through the process and you apply the controls and you comply with them and you monitor your compliance, you will cost effectively reduce risk and increase resilience. And the perception that it's a cost center, I think, is one of the biggest challenges. Not even considering actually going through the control implementation, documentation, and process itself. Just from the start, the perceptions. That make sense?
It does to me, because I think that a lot of us face that in our organizations where, and as they said this before in a couple other episodes, security becomes a hygiene factor. Something that Hertzberg said, you don't get credit for having it, but you get in trouble for not having it, such as toilet paper in the employee restroom. Nobody really cares if it's the one-ply super thin, you can see through it. At least if it's there, you're okay. And that's why everybody wants the key to the executive washroom. You get the kind the bears use in the commercials. But more to the point, what you've articulated is that there is a value to the organization as security implements and aligns with the compliance frameworks because of the reduction in risk. And it's a bit of an insurance sale. We used to talk about not being an ROI. I can't go ahead and say, hey, boss, you gave me $1 million last year and nothing happened. That was a good thing. Give me more money this year. It's like, well, nothing happened. What you want to be able to do is almost like an insurance to say, hey, you wore your seatbelt every time last year and you were not in a fatal accident and nobody in your family was injured. Whether or not you had an accident is outside of your control. But were you to have had some adverse event, that would have saved everybody's bacon, having that seatbelt and all those safeties in there. So it really has become a return on security investment. It's almost like an insurance type of a sale to say, insurance is what? Insurance is one way of assigning risk. I don't want to accept the risk of things going up and down. So I find some organization that said, hey, for a fixed price, I will assume that risk. I will insure your car, your house, your life, or something like that. And to a certain extent, that's the message that we need to bring across to our executives when we say a compliance framework is like an insurance policy. It is a seatbelt to ensure that our data doesn't go out, someone doesn't get in here and corrupt things, that we're not negotiating some ransomware payment at some point, or worse yet, end up with a 60 Minutes crew on our front desk saying, can I talk to your CEO, please? You're going to be a big story this week. Correct. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, compliance is definitely something we have to do. It's just something we live with. I think, our approach to compliance is where I see a lot of problems when I do consulting engagements. One, I see a lot of organizations approach a per compliance. So most organizations have multiple compliance requirements that they have to meet, and they sort of approach it one at a time. And so your admins, you're constantly, having to do interviews and pulling time away from your admin staff, and they get fatigued from doing, I've got to do interviews for PCI. I've got to do interviews for HIPAA. I've got to do interviews for, whatever the case may be, right? SOC 2 or whatever the case. And what I don't see organizations doing is, most of these controls have a lot of overlap, right? I wished organizations would take all their compliance requirements, put them in, roll them into one set of controls, and then you can do one assessment that meets all your requirements. And you see it a little bit with the GRCs, but most of the GRCs do not. They don't mix and match with the assessments. You have a GRC and it's doing doing a gap assessment on PCI, or it's doing a gap assessment on a SOC 2, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's one of the big challenges I see. And again, it's the other thing I would say, and maybe I'm wrong here. I don't want to get on my high horse, but policies. Oh my gosh, everybody looks at policies as something I write and I stick on the shelf, and maybe every once in a while I'll blow off the dust and read them. But I can't say how many times I go into an organization, and it's the same compliance, right? Like I'll use HIPAA as an example, but say HIPAA, and we do the assessment, and every year I come in and we do the assessment. They seem to make the same exact mistakes, and they treat the assessment as it's a laundry list, right? When we're done, we have this laundry list, and every year they fix this laundry list. I'm like, you know what? If you would just take this from a policy and a process standpoint and fix your processes, you wouldn't have this laundry list every year. So they don't really improve, right? The laundry list changes a little bit every year, but basically they never address their problems. So I think policy and getting, established processes is huge.
And it's interesting because you had mentioned a little bit earlier the concept of HIPAA and some of the frustrations with it. So quick war story, back in 1992, I was running cybersecurity in a company at 4,000 people. We're a consulting firm. I was the one cybersecurity guy, by the way. That's how big and important it was. And they had a healthcare practice. And I said, hey, let's get together and say we could do security in healthcare. And you know what? Nobody cared because there's no requirement. Now, fast forward to the late 90s when I'm with a different company, we said, hey, there's HIPAA and there's a requirement out there. And so we went out, we marketed to a whole bunch of healthcare companies, and guess how many we sold? 0. Why? Because no one gone to jail yet for HIPAA violations.
Right.
As a result, they're like, well, we're not going to pay attention to it until somebody else gets shot, and then we're going to say, okay, I guess maybe this is a big deal. But HIPAA, I think we talked about earlier in the pre-show, didn't come in easily. There was a lot of difficulty in that, and a lot of people saying it's not going to work. But how far have we come since 1996 when HIPAA was first enacted?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point because I remember I was still in the federal government when the public law was passed, and I even though I didn't have anything to do with healthcare at the time, I remember that we kind of considered it, those of us that were, exploiting foreign systems and saying, hey, if we're doing this to them, they're doing it to us, and we need to have kind of a baseline. Thought that could be an early win for compliance and monitoring of compliance. But there were a lot of naysayers. There was a lot of gnashing of teeth about this from the definition of a covered entity. And it wasn't until the 2 rules were implemented that we started getting traction. And now, if you look at it 20-something years later, my goodness gracious, I would hate to even try to estimate how much risk has been reduced, how much, especially as healthcare has moved to electronic medical records, having that well-regulated regime in place has precluded a lot of damage, in my opinion. And the cost, who's paying for it, has been completely settled out. It's built into budgets. It's built into overhead. And frankly, since we're going to talk about CMMC, I think we're going to see something similar when the two rules are done with the rulemaking, sometime around the middle of October, I'm thinking. We will see the same kind of glide path. It may take a while, but all of that will shake out, and we will have, just like we have in healthcare, generally speaking, we've got reduced risk. There's nation-state threat actors that successfully, penetrate the best defenses. But I think we will have a DoD supply chain, the defense industrial base, that is at once more resilient if the stakeholders buy in, if the DIB executives and the leadership buy in, and they cost effectively reduce risk. So I'll get off my social bandstand now about that.
Well, what you've done is you've introduced kind of the next topic, which is wonderful, and that was to talk about the idea of the federal government has made approaches in areas such as healthcare, HIPAA, and the regulations there. Private industry has done things, for example, in the credit card world, the payment card industry, the PCI DSS. There are international standards out there, ISO 27001 and the like. But now we started talking about CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model. And the CMMC, if we think about that, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, let me get the last C in there. And once you're in the defense industrial base, or the DIB, as you would refer to it, you probably don't even know what that is. You're just thinking about it's another 4-letter acronym coming for the government. Well, what it is, but it addresses some of the things that Brian had talked about earlier, that I wish there were some sort of standardization across all this requirement and this framework and that framework, because what it does is it harmonizes all those into one common general framework. So let's talk a little bit about CMMC and what it actually is and what does it address. Do you want to jump on that one, or should I go into my book of dictionaries and read from it?
Sure. Okay. So I'm just going to give one over the world. This has been based on my experience being inside the NIST, FISMA, FedRAMP environment and going through the phases, the FISMA phases for general support systems, major applications, minor applications. It's the cadence and battle rhythm of that within the DoD and within federal civilian agencies is fairly well shaken out. And what the CMMC is going to culminate in, it's just my opinion, this is my word picture for it, is that it's essentially going to be an Uber ATO, authorization to operate, that constituents, based on how much work they do and how much controlled unclassified information they process, but the members of the defense industrial base are going to be covered under that ATO, depending on what level they need to get, and depending on how the dust settles on this final rulemaking that is culminating here in a few weeks. They will be either level 1 where they can self-assess, level 2, mostly they can't self-assess, some can, and then level 3, and it will culminate with system security plans, at least for level 2 and level 3. So for the first time, and I've spent a lot of time in the defense industrial base, but for the first time, contractors, primes, and first-tier subs that handle controlled unclassified information will have to go through the process of identifying their systems that handle CUI, controlled unclassified information, and they will have to document the risk that is associated with those systems based on the controls. There's different terminology, but essentially then they will produce, the defense industrial base companies, a system security plan for that system, for the assets, the entities that are in scope for CUI, right? And it's going to force, frankly, it's going to force third-party assessor organizations and other consulting organizations to be agents of change inside the defense industrial base. That's probably a whole other topic, but I can't tell you how many times the mentality of checking the block is in place, in my experience, inside these firms. It's the days of paying lip service, I think, are ending. There has to be a real effort to apply control, look at your system, document the risk, apply controls, and where there are plans of action and milestones, where there's gaps, where your encryption doesn't meet the standards, or where your log aggregation and analysis doesn't meet the standards, you'll get a POEM.
Yeah, and for a little bit of background, for those who are not in this community, back in September 2020, DoD published in their DFARS, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, an interim rule that introduced the concept of the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC 1.0. And it had 5 different levels in it, and you were 1, they could be going from 2 to 3 and 4 to 5. And it was fairly complete and complex. And they said anybody wants to be a consultant or wants to be an auditor or wants to be a registered practitioner, sign up. I signed up. I've been paying them their fee every year, but I really haven't had that much of a business opportunity, because what happened was a couple of years later, they ended up changing things. And so in July of 2022, after getting all the comments, they said, well, we're going to restack this. It's going to be CMMC 2.0. It's going to be not 5 levels, but 3 levels. And level 1, the first level, which you had indicated before you could do with a self-attestation, would be organizations that are handling federal contract information, or FCI. Well, what does that mean? Let's say that I manufacture ballpoint pens for the Pentagon. Well, there's nothing really defense security related about that. It's not like I'm making a missile seeker head. Yet, however, somebody would still concern about the fact that if you could interrupt the flow of ballpoint pens going to the Pentagon. Well, maybe not so much now because of all the computers, but you could have some impact on it, and you can learn a little bit about it. It's the old problem, how many pizzas are being ordered on a Friday night at the Pentagon? If the number goes up, something is up. And so those organizations, because they say, well, you're in the defense industrial base, you're selling to the Pentagon, but we're going to give you some pretty basic requirements that you can handle. And so from that perspective, you're not going to be given a spectacular amount of requirements, but you're going to get a number of different things that make a little bit of sense to say, okay, yeah, I should probably do this, or I should probably do that and protect my organization. Okay, that sounds good. Layer 2 or level 2 goes beyond that. And instead of having just 6 domains and 15 requirements, it's going to then go ahead and take a look across all these different requirements that are going to come out of the NIST special publication 800 TAC 171, and they just come out with version 3. And so what we find out then is Ron Ross and his team, I'm trying to get Ron on the show. He said he's really, really busy, and I know, and he's doing work for the country, but I got to get him on the show at some point in time. He's just done some amazing things. But now what we're looking at is that at this level 2, we're going to say, hey, now I'm going to have to handle CUI, C-U-I, what we used to call FOUO, for official use only, or had all other names, but now it's controlled unclassified information. And that idea then is to say, hey, maybe you are building a missile seeker head, or you're doing something, it's not classified, it's not secret or top secret or even confidential, but it's still something that we don't necessarily want enemies of the state getting access to. And therein lies the business problem, or I come back to the business problem that this framework is designed to solve, is that the United States was getting robbed blind by espionage, going after not necessarily let's break into the Pentagon and steal stuff, but let's go after a contractor, or let's go after a small business that's in there under an 8A working for a contractor, or some other mentoring relationship where they're doing. And that's a great place to harvest information. And they've been cleaning our clocks for years. And so the whole idea here is that we're going to finally fix it. Now, this has been working its way through the system, and it's been a little bit frustrating for some of us waiting to say, when is this thing finally going to percolate through? Because there's some proposed changes to the 32 CFR Part 170. And if you go look at the Code of Federal Regulations in Title 32, there is no Part 170 yet. It's all wait to go there. So if you're Googling around, it's like, wait a minute, there is no regulation, yet there's pages and pages that are being proposed. And as you said, they're probably going to come out in October. So people sitting and they say, like, yeah, I'm not in the defense industrial base, I'm just going to tune out the show. It's like, time out, wait, there's more. And the reason is what? If we go back and take a look at a document that you had worked on many years ago back in the Clinton administration, I remember PDD 63. What was PDD 63?
Yeah, so it was, and I will never forget being, way back bench and making this observation I'm going to tell you about. But it was essentially Presidential Decision Directive 63, I think it's still classified collateral secret, is we articulated, or the government articulated, that there are sectors that we have critical infrastructure in this country, including oil and gas, transportation, state, local, municipalities, healthcare and public healthcare. And so there's 16 sectors of critical infrastructure that make this country and this society operate, right? And that because they're critical, they can be targeted by foreign threat actors or other types of malicious threat actors that would undermine what we have in this country, right? The liberty that we have, the ability to innovate, the prosperity. And so those sectors, one of the things that this PDD did was to set up information sharing and analysis centers. And frankly, it's been a long slog to get the ISACs to be providing actionable information, but they're at the point. I subscribe to a number of the ISACs, and they are providing actionable information now. And the members of the critical infrastructure sectors are using these ISAC data feeds to increase their resilience, cost effectively reduce their risk. And it's been, it's been frankly fantastic. And there are murmurings, more than murmurings, explicit discussions that the cybersecurity maturity model certification framework will be extended from out of the DoD supply chain to those 16 sectors. So again, think of rail, air, ground transportation, think of healthcare, public health, think of power generation, power distribution. All of the organizations that are involved, they already have these organizations, if they're regulated, they already have compliance requirements. And now, as you indicated so wonderfully, G-Mark, it's going to be amalgamized and consolidated, the thinking goes, into CMMC. So leaning forward in the saddle, is probably a wise move.
Yeah, and I think what you've raised is something that, my thought up until last year was this, is that Chris Inglis, who had been the deputy director at NSA, was also a brigadier in the Air Force Reserve. He's a very successful career, and then he's gone on and left public service, and I do thank him very much for all of his years of contributing to our nation. But my thought was this, it had CMMC matured this past year, and they're sitting around at the White House saying, okay, well, DOD came up with this thing. What about all you other federal agencies? Well, we'll write our own. We'll write our own. And the president says to his security director, well, what do you think? He said, well, I've been a career in DOD, and we just wrote one, and it worked. And it's not just based on DOD standards. It's based on the federal acquisition requirements, the FARs, as well as the NIST Special Publication 800 series. So NIST SP 800, 171, and 171A, which are going to define these requirements. They refer back, for most of us know about the NIST 853, Rev 5, which is the catalog of all possible known requirements that are out there, over 1,000 of them. And when someone says, are you NIST 853 compliant? That's not a compliance document. It's like, are you compliant with the telephone book? But rather, what we're looking at is to have this framework that allows us to go for level 1 or level 2, and level 3 is to come. But one of the challenges for organizations, and this is all these resources are out here, is scoping. What's in scope and what's not in scope? Because to a certain extent, a little bit like when you're doing the ISO 27001, you've got to draw a boundary around something, or PCI, you draw a boundary. This is in scope. And then all you have to do is to deal with the gazintas and the gazoutas. When data comes in and data goes out, and somebody tries to get too clever, and they say, I'm just going to put this in scope. Yeah, but you got 400 connections. You're better off to put that in scope with only 3 or 4 or 5. And so as one looks at this, and I've gone through and I've helped organizations so far as a consultant. It turns out you can be an auditor or you can be a consultant, but you can't do both.
Right.
And it's a good reason they kind of drawn the dividing line down the middle of that. And that's a CMMCAB.org for people who want more data on that. But you guys have done something a little bit even more than that. And what you've said is that, hey, if someone's going to have to go through and be compliant in filling out all these forms to creating the security plan, you mentioned the SSP, and we can get into that in a moment. And this is going to be a monster paperwork drive. One client, he's been building this gigantic pile of binders and printing things off and sticking them in there just like it's 1984 again. But there's a better way to do it, isn't there?
Yeah, I think Brian needs to just describe kind of the platform, the solution we came up with, and then I think we can pivot off of that. If that's right.
Sure.
Because again, anytime I see someone come with a better mousetrap, I'd love to talk about it.
Well, I mean, I'm a process guy. I'll say Josh is the brain trust here. I'm just a guy. I'm the worker bee. I look at, like I was saying, how we combine different compliance requirements to try to, make everything as fast and as easy as possible. And that's the way I've approached it. And one of the biggest issues that I see is always pulling time from the administrative folks, right? You've got to do interviews. You've got to collect documents. So those are the two, I'd say, largest, I'd say 3. Writing your SSP, right? Getting your scope set up, documenting your systems will be number 1. And then after, assuming that's all done, then the next thing is getting those interviews done and collecting that documentation and then tying that to the various controls. So what we did was we said, okay, well, it's really tough to get time with the administrative staff. So we came up with a solution that will allow you to interview all your staff asynchronously, whether you're doing 5 or 50 or 100, it doesn't really matter. And then the solution right sizes the right questions to the right interviews. And instead of doing face-to-face interviews, it does AI-enhanced audio interviews. And so the idea is not to let the AI do all the work, but what we want to do is we want to find a way that the consultant or auditor in this case is getting at least the preliminary information out of the way. And so when you actually go in and start spending time with your admin staff, instead of spending an hour and a half trying to figure out the basics, now you're just going back and drilling in. Okay, well, you said this in your interview. What did you really mean? Or you talked about this solution. What did you really mean? And so we found that it probably eliminates anywhere between, and it depends on how you set it up, but anywhere between 50 and 75% of the effort.
And that's huge. And one of the ideas that when I first was talking to you guys, it just seemed to be brilliant, is if I take a look, for example, and doing something simple like a CMMC level 1, where I'm going to go around with my clipboard, I'm going to be interviewing or getting information, and I'm working on access control, so I'm going to sit down, tell me about your external connections, and I document all that stuff. Thank you very much. And then I go down my access control list. And then a little bit later, I've got to come back to my control 4, which is physical protection. So I got to set up another appointment with the same guy and said, oh, by the way, can you tell me about how you limit physical access? Okay, got it. Great. Okay. And then the next, oh man, I forgot about this on number 5. I got to talk about boundary protection system. Okay, we're done. I'm pretty sure we're good. We're great. Oh, wait a minute. There's one more. And so what we find then is that typically, and this has been the frustrating thing, is you go linearly. I've got N controls and I go down, get all the 1 and then the 2 and then the 3. What you guys have effectively done is cross-threaded it so that when I've got the person who knows the answer to this, they probably know the answer to this, and this as well. Let's get it all out in one. Let's let this thing all get sorted and put in the right buckets. And if I understand it right, with the tool that you have with regard to that AI, I can be able to say, hey, you've now collected all the information you need from this piece to be able to incorporate it effectively into your system security plan and complete it. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, because I was going to say, one of the biggest issues is you get the consultants and they may not be an expert in every area, right? And so when you do these interviews, like you were just saying, you're going to forget this question, you forget that one. So what the solution does is we've introduced a concept, we call it responsibilities. Think of it like RBAC, similar. So we say, okay, well, based on this control, where would it apply within your organization? Does it apply to your network team, your server team, your desktop team, and so forth? And so what the solution does is okay, we're taking these controls and then we're going to do this interview, and then each interview has a set of responsibilities, and then based on those responsibilities, it dynamically assigns the right controls.
And just to amplify that, so based on all of our experience, we know that there are solutions that have been implemented in the federal government. And I just want to caveat, the solutions I'm going to mention by name, we do not own individual securities, or we do not. We may have some indexed funds. These are just solutions that we've seen work.
I'm going to get my pen out and start writing.
and in the private sector. And so just based on our experience in seeing these tools implemented, we know that by the mere implementation of these tools, the control implementation language, or in CMMC, the objective requirements, like there's 320 objective requirements for CMMC level 2, right? So that's 320 issues that are objective requirements that have to be written to and documented for the SSP. But we have a list of tools that Yubico makes the YubiKey. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, Gmark, but it helps across so many of the AC's multiple control frameworks. Oh, you got one. There you go.
Yeah, one. I had it set over. I didn't have it prepped for this. You could tell this wasn't set up, but yeah, absolutely.
Right. And then there's ThreatStop, and there's Red Seal. And when these tools, the Mandiant suite, again, we don't own any stock in any of these companies, but when they are implemented appropriately, just by their mere implementation, no matter what your scope is, if those tools are inside the scope, you've got your objective requirements documented. So we haven't built that into the platform, but when we see it, we can sort of cross-pollinate and ask for those data. Does that make sense?
It does. So, for example, if I'm asking somebody about, I'm going to reach for a little prop again, authentication. How do you guys do authentication? And someone does, it's like, okay, you've just answered a whole bunch of questions right now. First of all, I know you use MFA. Secondly, you got a clue. because you know how to go ahead and use these TOTP tokens. And this is going to be a way to say, hey, put this thing in here, authenticate. For people who have not used the YubiKey, go take a look at their website. And at Yubico, I require them for my global administrator use. You're not going to be a global admin unless you're going to physically authenticate. Why? What's the value of this? The idea is this, is that you could fish me out of my user ID and my password, and you might somehow convince me to read to you the 6 characters that are on my phone or press OK. But you know what? Unless this thing is actually plugged into the computer and I touch the little thing, and it's not a fingerprint reader, by the way, it's just capacitance, it's not going to let me in. And so it basically, there's really no good way around it if you're an attacker. And I've looked at these things and said, okay, how would I defeat this and break them? And it's usually you just have to go kidnap somebody. Now, if that's in your threat model, then you're operating at a whole different level than I am.
Exactly. I mean, there's a couple nation state threat actors that could, pull off the kidnapping. But if you're being targeted by them, you might as well just surrender and negotiate.
Yeah, it's the point. It's like, okay, what do you want? Here it is. And by the way, your finger will work on it. Enjoy. You don't have to take my finger with you. Quick fun story. So very first security show I went to was 1985. I think it was a CSI show. It was the 8th annual or something. It was in Chicago. And one of the newfangled pieces of invention that they had was a fingerprint reader. Biometrics. That whole idea was a great concept. And there was a guy who was demonstrating it, and I'm watching it. I'm kind of fascinated by it. Then he wandered off. He was talking to somebody else. And this is me with my weird sense of humor. So some lady is looking at it, and I said, would you like to know how it works? And it says, well, just take your finger and place it inside that little hole right here. And she does that. And I said, if your fingerprint is correct, it will give you access. And if it's wrong, a blade cuts the tip of your finger off. Ran away. And I bet she's probably afraid for life about using biometrics just because of some kid's weird sense of humor at the time. But that seemed to be interesting there.
Well, remember when they used to also think that if you did biometric, that they were stealing your fingerprints. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. They don't understand how it's stored and just the array and things such like that. So,
well, I mean, look, the 3 factors are who you are, biometrics, what you know, user ID and password, what you have, a token. So the token or the YubiKey, those are, I think that's at the heart of us being able to give unbiased, objective list of solutions that DIB or any security-minded leader would like to be able to implement that will help them cost-effectively reduce risk, increase resilience. So how many times have I said that, G-Mark? Is there like a count?
I don't know. Maybe we should have like a drink for that every time we have to do that or something like that. And it'll be our secret words. There we go. Off we go. So let's think about going forward. We've talked about the DIB and people that are going to go ahead and be responsible for CMMC. And for those who are saying, yeah, this might be helpful. Is that all you guys do with just CMMC? Or have you said, hey, wait a minute, this could be generalized and this could work across a number of frameworks?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Brian, how many frameworks do we currently have or offer or support?
Right now, about 24.
Is that all?
So the nice thing about the solution is that it really, I mean, again, I was saying about adding different compliance into the other. The solution can take, we can add customize. So you can take your PCI requirements, you can take your HIPAA requirements, you can take whenever you want, right? And we could combine them all into one framework that would be, specialized just for your organization. And that's one thing that I like about it is, and again, no security person is an expert in every framework, right? And so that's what one of the best features I think about this solution is that you don't need to be. You can sound like you're intelligent when you're doing your interviews because you're not doing them anymore. You're getting all this preliminary information before you step into a call with anyone, and you already know 90% of what you're going to say before you even get into the call. So you're not wasting their time. You're not wasting your time.
So what you got then is a more effective way of doing things. You're going to create less people trying to hide under their desks because they see the guy coming at them with a clipboard because, here we go again. And ultimately, of course, the benefit for the organization is a cost-effective decrease in risk.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is since it's audio-based, you can start and you can stop. You could do it over a period of weeks if you want to. There's no, I've got to sit down for an hour and answer all these questions. It can be, it's just way more flexible.
Yeah, I agree. So thinking about as we're getting kind of close to the end of the show here, what are good steps for people to take next? If you're in the Defense Industrial Base, you've already heard of CMMC, you might have already gone through some training, you might have done some stuff like that, and we're starting to see more tools coming out there, but what you guys have done is unique, at least what I've seen so far, and that seems to be a real force multiplier in the ability of somebody to go ahead and do
I
that.
agree. It is a force multiplier. And just my opinion, I'm not unbiased. I think my understanding, and just from what I've heard, and by the way, thanks for having us on this podcast, G-Mark. You have covered some fantastic topics. So I think most of the listeners are either CISOs or on the security staff or assistant CISOs. And I think first and foremost is lean forward in the saddle to start educating. Put the educator's hat on. Start educating the stakeholders, because this has really got to be a top-down driven event. And because if it's not, it can't be it cannot be faked. That's the days of paying lip service to security are coming to an end, G-Mark. And I think that message has to go out to the executive leadership of all the organizations that are, whether they're required to have CMMC or not. I think you could see the writing on the wall. You could see what's happened with HIPAA and healthcare. And so that's the first step, is start educating. Hey, look, just as I think you put it perfectly, this is an opportunity for us to get indemnification insurance in place, number one. Number two, we're really going to have to do this. Like, we really are. This is not a check the block exercise, right? And then number three, I think there are so many, I think you're going to have a URL up to like a landing page for us. And I think we have white papers. We've partnered with, in my opinion, one of the foremost third-party assessor organizations. Just have a lot of expertise, and they attend all of the working group sessions and all of the the things that we try to skate out of. I'm not speaking for you, G-Mark. I'm just saying I come in at 9:15 and take the back way in and look like I'm working all day. But we've partnered with them. You'll see them tagged on the white paper, and reach out to get additional specific recommendations for preparing for this. Does that make sense?
It does indeed. And I think what we've got going forward is an opportunity to, as you had said, reduce risk effectively. And by the way, what's the big stick relative to somebody just self-attesting? Did you run a marathon yesterday? Are you going to check? No. Okay, yes, I did. Is what they have is the False Claims Act. And that has been used by the federal government to go to come and says, you've made a false claim against the government. Not only are we going to take back what we gave you, not your profit margin, the gross amount, but we maybe even treble that. So now you get $1 million contract at a 10% margin, you make $100,000. Now you end up being millions in the hole. And after they go ahead and, as they say, a little bit like HIPAA, when a few people get rounded up in the lobby and get shot, people are going to pay attention, financially shot, of course, and they're going to say, hey, we're going to make it happen. So we don't want any of our listeners here at CISO Tradecraft to be in that situation where we're going to be reading about you. So here is your opportunity to listen to the messages here that we're getting from Brian Bradley and Josh Williams to get ahead of the problem. And so, we will put a link. Your site is fedshark.com, correct? But we'll have a special link so they can find your white papers and things like that, and people could find them more. Any last comments before I wrap up here, or we think we're good?
No, I was just going to say one thing. We've got some runway here. What kills you is what you don't know. So highly suggest, get that pre-assessment, figure out where you're at now, where you're at in maturity, levels, and take the advantage of the time. So if you don't have the right solutions in the place, at least you don't have to wait till the last minute. Start working on it now. Don't wait, till the deadline's here.
Absolutely. Hey,
The other thing we haven't really covered that I just want to get out there, the
Sure.
threat is real. I know of an organization that blocks over 300 DNS IP probes per second, 2.5 emails per second, and this is maybe a 20,000 employee organization. And these are not unsophisticated threat actors. So the threat is real. We probably buried that headline. I probably did. So in addition to the increasing resilience, cost effectively reducing risk, it is a prudent thing to do because the threat is real.
Absolutely. I will concur with you as a career military officer that, yeah, they're not going to stop just because things get difficult. They're going to keep on coming. And it's our job is to make it as extraordinarily expensive and difficult for them to try to steal stuff to the point where it's not even cost effective anymore, at which point, in a way, we could kind of say that we've achieved our victory here. So I do want to thank you. So Brian and Josh from Fedshark, you've been awesome on this. I have learned a lot. Hopefully this has been a great interaction for our audience. For those of you who are following us on our podcast, again, if you're listening to us, you can come watch us on YouTube. If you're watching us, come follow us on LinkedIn. We have a lot more information for you, and we would ask that you share with your fellow coworkers where you got your information to help you with your career, because we would like to help them with their career path as well. So thank you very much for tuning in. This is your host, G. Mark Hardy, and until next time, stay safe out there.